Hi, folks. I realized that a important beginning instructions video was missing from my YouTube channel, so I am recording that right now. Apologies for the confusion, but it is the very first video in the first week's assignment series, and so I thought I would just go ahead and re-record it again today and give you those instructions. So this is the instructions and actually lesson notes for assignment 1, which is the instructions from the lines drawing, where you're going to be creating this drawing and creating these layers. So what I failed to upload was the video on how to create those layers. But also included in this notes is a drawings checklist. And this is what I want to start with right here. So when you're starting a new drawing at home, you want to ask yourself what kind of drawing it is, and then you want to check for these things. So it would be a really good idea for you to print this checklist out and have it available. And what will happen is, as you continue through the semester, this checklist will kind of just be automatic for you. But for now, you want it to be something that's nearby so you can kind of keep track of it. So the first thing we're going to take a look at from the drawing is whether or not it is a decimal inch drawing or a metric drawing. And one of the giveaways here is the size of the dimensions. So 10 millimeters would be something not really that much bigger than the length of this line right here. So that would be really small. It might even be smaller than that, maybe half the length of that line. So the fact that this line is much longer than that is an indication that it's 10 inches. It makes more sense that would be 10 inches. So these dimensions that are being shown here are at decimal inch values. So that means we're using imperial units. What you're going to be doing is writing inside of the brackets the metric units that convert from those imperial units. So the conversion, by the way, is 25.4. So they're exactly 25.4 millimeters in a single inch. So if I take 10 inches and multiply it by 25.4, the answer here inside the brackets would be, in conversion to millimeters, would be 254. So all you have to do is take the number that's been given here. That's the number you're going to use to draw the length of the line with, and then multiply it times 25.4. And you're going to put in your answer here to 2 decimal places inside of these brackets, just like being shown in here, okay? So that part of it is the first step that we kind of need to understand, and there's your conversion right there as well in your worksheet so that you have it as a reference. So the first step is to ask yourself, is this an imperial or a metric drawing? And then we're going to go ahead and start a drawing file with that information, knowing that information. So if you were successful in loading AutoCAD on your home computer or using the virtual desktop, you're going to want to open AutoCAD by double-clicking on the symbol that you see on your desktop. So in my desktop, it's over here, but in your desktop, I think if it's the virtual desktop, will be somewhere over here. Just double-click on that, and it will open up the CAD file or CAD program. And this is what CAD looks like when no drawings are open. To start a new drawing, you're going to click on the arrow here, and you're going to go to No Template, Imperial or Metric. And we just figured out that this drawing should be drawn in imperial units, so we're going to choose the imperial choice here, and that's going to start a brand new drawing file. It's just taking a second to do that. The next step in our checklist is dock your command line. So in order to understand what that means, let me show you around AutoCAD just a little bit. It seems to be taking a little while flipping back and forth between things here. There we go. So when you're looking at AutoCAD and it's opening, we have the major areas that you want to pay attention to are your command line, which is up here where my cursor is here. You have your place to type a new command. And you always want to make sure that when you're ready to begin typing a command, or you're following along with me on a video, that this says command colon, and you're ready to start a new command. As you start typing a command, like I'll use for an example line as a command that I want to create a new line, what will happen as you start typing is the list of common aliases for the different types of commands will come up, and you'll see the command you're looking for come up on the list. So notice that all I had to do was type L and line came up as the first option. What I want you to start paying attention to is how few how little of the command you actually have to type for it to come up. So take a guess. What do you think the command is for circle? If I typed C, the first thing that comes up is circle. So I can just click that and go right into the circle command. Okay. So you'll be learning more commands and be learning to pay attention to read that command line. So this command line is docked right now, the way that it's been set up on my computer. I'm just going to minimize this a little bit so that I can see if I can get to the command line and undock it. But if your command line is undocked, it might be floating down here. There's three little lines next to the command line that you can grab and pull up and dock it up here. I'm having a hard time getting at those lines right now because of the way that it's, I think, it sized on my computer. But if your command line is already up here, you're all set. If it isn't and it's floating down here, you want to grab it from the dots lines and push it up there. And you'll see how it just kind of docks in place. Next is make sure that OSnaps, OTracks, and polar tracking are turned on. So when we draw with accuracy. And there's tools that we're going to use to draw with that accuracy. So we have tools down here. You don't have all the tools that I have. You have a hamburger button over here that allows you to put a checkbox next to things that you'd like to see. So the buttons that you want to make sure that you see down here are this button here, which is a polar tracking button. So there's polar tracking. This button here, which is O tracking. And let me see, where's object snap tracking, I should say. And then this is object snaps, which are called snap mode or OSnaps. And this allows us to snap to specific points as we start drawing. This is going to allow us to snap to certain angles and track off of those points. And this is going to allow us to snap to certain angles that we set. So those three buttons that we have there, and you can tell they're turned on because they're kind of highlighted, are going to allow us to draw with accuracy. This is our drawing area right here. And you can see my cursor moves around in that drawing area. We're using what's called the Cartesian coordinate system. And this is the positive X and Y coordinate that we'll be drawing in. Here is our ribbon. And this is another place for us to look and find other tools. When I'm demonstrating a lesson, pay attention to the tab that I have highlighted, because the tab will change what's available for choices. So if I'm in the Home tab, this Home tab is going to have a miscellaneous collection of things that get used the most often. So notice how I have a draw area, a modify area, an annotation area, layers, blocks, properties, groups, utilities, and so on. However, if I wanted an expanded version of my annotation, I can go to the annotation tab, and that's going to have a whole lot more options for me in order to add more complicated dimensions or more text options and things like that. So you will need to make sure you're paying attention to the tab that I have selected up here, and it will mostly be on the Home tab. You're going to want to pay attention to what's being written and asked of you in the command line as you're in the middle of a command. And you want to pay attention to what's going on here on your drawing, obviously. And make sure it appears and looks similar to what I have as an example drawing for you to follow in the videos. So that's step 3, making sure your object snaps, OTracks, and polar tracking are turned on. 4, determine the layers and line types required for the drawing and create a separate layer for each of the different lines and line weight categories and so on. And then we're creating a text style, and then we're going to create an appropriate place to save the file, and then you would begin your drawing. So this is where I can show you how to set up a layer. And layers are really, really important in AutoCAD. because when we start drawing, you don't want to put things all on the layer 0, which is the default layer that you get with AutoCAD. You can't erase layer 0. So we want to create a layer, and we want to get that layer to control the line weight, the line pattern, and and a few other things that we can control through layers. So when we're working with AutoCAD, the best practice is to control all of our lines by layer rather than having our lines having to be set individually every time we draw them. The other advantage to having multiple layers is we can turn off or freeze or lock layers that we don't want edited or that we want to be able to isolate or see, and it gives us more control over the drawing. So let's take a look at the list of layers that we're creating. And let's create those layers, and I'm going to just show you some tricks and just basic concepts. So we're going to create a center layer, a hidden layer, and a visible layer just to start with. And then after you get a sense of how to create those layers, you're going to be able to move on to the next few videos that have already been recorded for you, and we can keep going. So let's go back to AutoCAD and let's create some layers. So to create layers, I can click on Layer Properties, or I can type in LA at the command line, which brings up the layer command. And once I do that, whoops, I think I hit the wrong button. Once I do that, a new layer dialog box or floating box comes up. And one of the things that you're going to maybe want to do here is set the dialog box so that it is not going to dock, so you can right click on it and get rid of the checkbox that's next to allow docking, and go ahead and set it to auto hide. So when you set it to auto hide, it will collapse when it's not being used, like that. So it will collapse down to just a single bar when it's not being used. So you can actually leave the layer control open, move your cursor over the bar, and it exposes the layers. And so you have it when you need it, and then when you don't need it, you pull your cursor off of that bar and it makes the layers go away. I find this very useful with layers in particular because you tend to work with layers a lot. So I recommend you do this. If you would rather just type LA to open it and close it every time, you can do that too. So let's hit new layer, and let's also pay attention to the shortcuts that we have in order to start a new layer. So when you hover over a button like that, it will give you a little tooltip. So Alt plus the N key will give you a new layer. So all I have to do is type Alt N and get a new layer. Now I'm going to start with a layer that's called Visible, which is one of the layers you have to create for this next assignment. And we're going to go reference what it says for the visible layer. The visible layer should be the color white, which is color number 7, by the way. It was referenced up here. It should be a continuous line type, and it should be set to a line weight of 0.5. So notice up here, these lines have different line weights. You have thick ones and you have thin ones. We're going to be using the default line weight for the thin lines of 0.25, and we'll be using the 0.5 line weight for our thick lines. And all you need to do is reference this to see whether or not it should be thick or thin by looking at the line. And it also lets you know here in the layers whether or not a layer should be thick or thin. So let's go back to AutoCAD, and we're going to set those settings. So color has already been set. The reason for that is the default color that gets used for layer 0 is also white. So we have white already. If I wanted to change the color, just simply click on the color swatch, and a select color dialog box will come up and we can pick a new color. For the line type, that's also set to continuous already because that's the default line type that gets loaded in the 0 layer in AutoCAD. So how do I change the line type if I want to? You can click on continuous, and then you can load new line types. So see, I have a load with an ellipsis button that allows me to load new line types and load them into my project. And the last thing is to set the line weight. And so notice it says default. So if we click on that, the default line weight, as we know, should be 25 millimeters. So the default line weight is set to 2.25 millimeters. We want to change that to 0.5 millimeters for visible lines. And then you can see that it actually changes the line weight in visual representation on your screen as well. So just to show you the difference, I'm going to go ahead and make the visible layer current by double clicking on it. You see how that puts the green checkbox next to it. And I'm just going to do a line. So we'll also learn how to do a line command, L for line. And now as soon as I see the word line come up, I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard. And then I'm going to read my command line. It says line specify first point. And I can do a number of things to specify my first point. I could type in a value, which is what's called an absolute coordinate. So let's say I wanted to start the line at 1 unit over in the X direction and 0.5 units up from the Y direction. It's going to start the line at exactly 1 inch over from the 0 point where the X and Y axes intersect, and a ½ inch up in the Y direction, and I have my line started. It's going to look like an elastic. Now notice every once in a while my line turns kind of like a dashed green, and it snaps to a nice straight edge. This is where polar tracking is coming in play. OTracking and OSnaps will demonstrate here in a second. So that polar tracking allows me to see that I'm drawing at exactly the 0 degree angle. If I turn and go up, it snaps exactly at 90 degrees. It will snap again at exactly 180 and 270. And if it so happens that I've got a drawing that has 30 degree angles, I could change to that 30 degree angles, and now it's going to snap at 30 degree angle increments as well. There's 30, there's 60, 90. So that's how polar tracking works. So I'm going to keep that on 90 for now. And then just draw in that line. So I'll just draw the line at a random length by picking a new point. And then if I don't want to use the line command anymore, I hit escape. Now let's draw a line using the 0 layer. It's also going to be black, and I'll just hit L and enter again and just kind of randomly draw the line this time. Pick a spot with my mouse, with the left button of my mouse, and then draw the line the same length. Now these lines look like they are the same weight, so why did we change the layer? One of the things that you want to make sure you have turned on is your line weight display. So if you don't see that line weight display here in your drawing properties, I guess, or drawing status, you can make sure that you use your hamburger button and look for line weight. If you don't have a checkbox next to line weight, go ahead and put one next to it, and that button will appear. Now watch what happens when I click on that line weight button. Now we're able to see the differences in line weight because they're being controlled by the line weights that have been set by layer. So let's create another layer. And this time we're going to create a layer, and I'll use Alt-N to create a new layer. And we'll make this one a hidden layer. So I'm just kind of moving around through the example lines you're going to be creating anyway. So this one's to show you how to set up one that needs a different color. So let's see what color hidden is supposed to be. It's supposed to be green, which is color number 3. It's supposed to be a hidden 2 line type, but it is supposed to be a default line weight. So we'll go back to AutoCAD and make those changes. So it's color number 3, that's green. Go back into that layer, so we've successfully set that to green. It's not supposed to be a continuous line. It's supposed to be a line called hidden 2. So let's see if we can find that in the list by loading that line type. And if I scroll down, I can see we've got hidden, hidden 2, and hidden X2. So according to the directions, it did say hidden 2. So I want to select that one. And that brings in that line type. And then I want to select that line type, which will then associate it with that layer. And the last setting that we need to change is the line weight, but it's already set to default. So we're all set. Now, what if you had your cursor on the visible layer when you hit new layer? It may have set your line weight to 0.5 millimeters. If that's the case, you just click on that line weight again and change it back to the default, and then it will make it 0.25 millimeters. Now, how do we know that the default is 0.25 millimeters? Let's see if we can find that stuff out. I'm going to put my cursor down here and right click this time on that line weight setting, which will allow me to go into line weights settings, line weight button, I should say. And in line weight settings, you can see that units for listing is in millimeters, and the default has been set to 0.25 millimeters. So that's how I know it's 0.25 millimeters. I could change those settings if I wanted to, but that's the default settings that AutoCAD came with, so I want to keep it the same that you guys would have set up on your end when you downloaded the software, started using it right out of the box. So now let's switch to the hidden layer. So this is another way we can switch layers. I showed you here how we could double click on the layer to make it green, with the green checkbox show up next to it. But if you're on the Home tab, you can see that we have a little tiny section of that Home tab that's devoted to your layer control. And if I click on the arrow next to the one layer that's showing and pick a different layer, that makes that layer the current layer instead of the one that we had before. So this is allowing me to switch to different layers so that I can switch to the layer I want and draw or make a new line. So let's see what happens if I make another line. L, enter. Specify first point. Let's just pick a random point and draw the line. We end up with a line that's green and that has the hidden two line pattern. So it looks like it's working properly. We are setting our layers up, and our layers are controlling our line types, which is exactly how you want to set it up. All right, so let's do that one more time with the center line. I'm going to type in LA and hit enter and create a new layer and call this one center. And see, this time it copied or duplicated the settings for the hidden layer because that's the layer that was selected or highlighted or current when I hit the new layer button. So I do need to change the color to the correct color. So center lines are supposed to be blue or color number 5 and have the center 2 line type. So let's change this to blue. Change this to the center 2 line type. And switch the line type here. So that loaded the line type. Remember, when we click on load, we look for the line type we want to load, and then we actually have to select it to make it be assigned to the layer that we are currently highlighted. And then the line weight, I believe, was the default line weight. Let's just double check that. Default, okay? So we now have another layer called center, and it has a different line type. If I just were to draw the line, Command L, enter, and let's draw a line this way this time. There's our center pattern, and it's working, okay? So this gives you an idea of how to control layers. You can see how it's going to control our line types, our line weights. What you're going to want to do is create a layer for each one. Let me back up there. I just realized I did something without explaining what I did. I just erased a bunch of stuff. So once you're have practiced making a layer and testing to see if your line actually comes out like the layer says, you're ready to make the rest of the layers yourself, set their appropriate colors, line weights, and line types according to the instructions. When you're done testing those lines, you can take your cursor and using a from right to left direction, this is important to see it creates a window that has a dashed outline to it. What the dashed outline means in AutoCAD is that anything this window touches, even if it's not completely inside the window, will be selected. If I drew and notice I have no command invoked while I do this also. If I draw a line in the opposite direction, notice that the window is a solid edge and it's blue. And you'll notice that only the things that are completely contained inside the window get selected. So I'd have to put a window around everything here to select it all. So what I did, you saw me do the first time before I started to explain it, is I just kind of very sloppy window. I just made sure I touched this green window, and going from right to left, I touched everything and selected things very quickly. So when you're not too concerned about avoiding things, you can just kind of do a window like that. And the way that I'm finishing that rectangle is, some of you will accidentally start a rectangle without realizing it by just clicking on the screen without a command invoked. And if ever that happens, just hit escape if you didn't mean to do it. But if you're using it like I am, it's a great way to select multiple items very quickly. Items are selected when you see these blue squares on them. Those are called grips. And so with those items selected, I can now just hit the delete button on my keyboard, and it's going to delete those items. So that's one way to get rid of things. Another way to get rid of things is to type in E at the command line. You can see that E results in the command erase. So if I hit enter right now, the next instruction is to select the objects that I want to erase. So I could select one object at a time like that, or like I just showed you, I could put a window and select every object and then hit enter and do the same thing. So you now know how to create and erase objects. So I think you're ready to go ahead and begin the first stage, which is creating all the layers you need for the first assignment. And please feel free, before you get started with the actual drawing part, play around with some things. You've got all these shapes that you could try playing around with. What happens when you click on circle? What does the command line tell you to do? Follow it. Specify center point of circle. Oh, okay. And now what do you think? What do you intuitively think you're supposed to do? Create a radius. Sure enough, that is. See how the circle starts at the center, and it's defining the radius. What if you wanted to define a diameter? Let's see what happens if we click on diameter. Now we can define the circle's diameter rather than the radius. And we can tell that by noticing where my cursor is as it relates to where the center is. The diameter is always half of the radius. The diameter value, rather, if you type in a diameter value, the size of the circle will be half of what you would type in for a radius value. So we're going to get a smaller circle. So depending on what you're given for dimensions, we might want to use one choice over the other. And a lot of these commands have different choices after you go in and start to build them. So the arc command, what does that do? Specify a start point. Let's see what happens. Specify a second point. Specify an end point. And you can see that I can create all kinds of weird different, radii arcs, big arcs, smaller arcs. And then what happens when you click on that arc and grab one of these grips? That changes your radius. This also changes your radius, but notice that the other two grips the arc is remaining going through them. So feel free to go in and play around with these things, because now you know how to erase them, right? You know how to just erase them if you don't want them there anymore. And part of the way that you'll learn in this class is by exploration, hitting buttons and trying things out. So after you've created your layers, have some fun and see what happens when you start to try to use some of these tools.